Lots of the DMEK videos on this channel are exotic cases. They're weird, strange things that come in that are entertaining and fascinating for me, and that's why I make some videos to share. But you know, the vast majority of our cases are not like that. The vast majority of our cases are normal and routine cases. And I thought to make a video here showing the everyday, common, complicated DMEK cases, if that makes sense, which is to say the stuff that we see all the time that looks scary but actually isn't. So this is a patient that we operated on just about 2 weeks ago in our office-based operating environment. This is his only eye. The left eye is Tysical. So this is the eye that he's been seeing with. He's had a history of bad glaucoma. That's why he has this trabeculectomy. He has these big iris defects, and he has a failed previous DSEK graft. And when you look at this eye looks really scary. You know, the pressure's on because it's the patient's only eye. They've already had a transplant in the past, a DSEK, and now it's failed, and there are these iris defects, and you worry about the trab. And so you're thinking, well, can this operation be done? But I want to show you this unedited video to show you how even in an operation like this, the surgery normally goes just according to typical routine. So we've made our various paracenteses and then a clear corneal incision about 3 millimeters in greatest extent directly temporally. I have an anterior chamber maintainer connected to a 60 cc syringe that's filled with air, and my assistant is just depressing that syringe while I strip off this failed previous DSEK graft. You can see with air in the anterior chamber how good the visibility is in this eye. And that's the reason why I like to use air as opposed to saline or viscoelastic, just because you can see what you are doing so much better. And when you're doing an operation like this, it's had a failed previous endothelial graft, visibility is really, in my opinion, paramount, because the biggest thing you worry about is whether the new graft is going to stick to the back surface of the patient's cornea. And the thing that's likely to interfere with that is little remnant rests of unstripped Descemet's membrane behind, which tend to become fibrotic and bulky and could get in the way of adhesion. That's the thing I worry about the most. So to make sure I don't leave any of those, I fill the anterior chamber with air and I look for them. And not only do I visually inspect for them, but after I've sort of gone around and stripped what I can see, I feel for them. That's what I'm doing here with this inverted Sinskey hook. I'm just going around and feeling to see if I can strip anything that I can't visualize off the back surface of the cornea. The other thing that I'm going to do is always in these eyes that have failed previous transplants, I use coaxial forceps and I reach inside the eye and I see if I can find and strip any of these little fibrotic remnants left behind. I like to use coaxial forceps as opposed to an inverted Sinskey hook because usually these remnants left behind are tough and leathery and you can't pull them out with a scraper or an inverted Sinskey hook. Often you have to directly engage them with coaxial forceps. So I will take great pains and use multiple different vantage points, the main incision and various paracenteses. I'll move the anterior chamber maintainer and I'll reposition it elsewhere so I can verify that I've stripped all of these fibrotic remnants before I put the graft in the eye. And frankly, this is the part of the operation that takes me the longest. It's the part that's the most meticulous because I really don't want to leave any of this stuff behind. And sometimes even with air, it's difficult to see. So you look, you see what you can visualize, and you feel with the inverted Sinskey hook and with the coaxial forceps. And you got to really watch it when the eye has previously had DSEK, because lots of times when doctors are doing DSEK, they'll just strip centrally and not strip peripherally, or you won't strip as much. And so it's very common to find fibrotic rims of unstripped Descemet's membrane in patients who've had DSEK. And I feel very strongly that if you want to maximize the chance that your DMEK will attach in these eyes, you really, really want to take your time and remove as many of them as possible. After that's done, The operation proceeds in this eye basically like normal, which is interesting because, lots of eyes that have had glaucoma and had some kind of glaucoma surgery, probably the most common of those eyes I see have a tube shunt. And eyes that have a tube shunt behave badly during DMEK. The reason they behave badly during DMEK is twofold. Number one, often those eyes have got a bunch of anterior synechia, which results in a shallow anterior chamber. And that shallow anterior chamber renders the confines for unfolding the graft cramped, and it's more difficult to open the graft up. The second problem that the tube shunt often creates is the tube seems to be very often associated in my patients with zonular weakness and air and fluid misdirection into the back of the eye. So with aqueous and air misdirecting into the back of the eye and IOL instability, sometimes it makes those surgeries really challenging, with bubbles mysteriously coming forward and difficulty deepening the anterior chamber. You really don't see any of that when you have a trab as opposed to a tube. So these eyes, which look scary and intimidating, often really are not. They behave normally. Now I have the anterior chamber switched over from air to saline, and I use saline to maintain the volume of the AC when I'm doing my iridotomy with the capsulotomy handpiece that comes with our phaco machine made by Oertli, because I can see the iris better when the AC is full of fluid as opposed to air. It allows me to visualize how big that iridotomy is, so I can see it. With air, everything is compressed and I can't really see the iris moving. Now I'm injecting the graft into the anterior chamber, and I'm being careful to avoid those big iris defects. I don't want to shoot the graft down into the area around the lens, so I angle the graft when I'm inserting it away from the iris defects there. The next thing I do is always remove these bubbles from the eye so I can see what's going on. Now here I get a little too zealous. I think the graft is right side up there, but I flip it over, and now I realize, looking at that orientation mark, oops, now I flipped the graft wrong side up where it was right side before. So now I do a little bit of shuffling to try to see if I can flip the graft over. I'm looking at it now. I'm trying to check our Motsuro sign. It's still not exactly clear to me whether the graft is right side up. So I'm going to position it in the eye, add a little bit more fluid, and you'll notice the chamber deepens right up, which is not what you would normally see in an eye with a tube shunt. And in this eye, the chamber deepens no problem. So I can get the graft to unfold really nicely. It's a big graft. It's tumbling around in this deep chamber, and it's no issue at all. So now I've got the graft. It's rolled up, sitting in the middle of the eye. I'm checking the Motsuro sign here through the main wound. It's no problem at all. The chamber is perfectly stable. That's a positive Motsuro sign, which means the graft is right side up. I have this little triangular orientation notch down inferotemporally. You'll see it a little bit adjacent to where I'm injecting right now. That should form half of an arrowhead which points clockwise, and that indicates that the graft is right side up. So here we have the graft mostly unfolded, sitting there on top of the iris. There's that little inward fold supraonasally, and I'm trying to lift the graft up to the back surface of the cornea now. I'm trying to inject air, and what I'm observing is that the cannula that I'm using to put air in the eye seems to be blocked. So I'm passing that off to my assistant, and I'm just, while we're getting a new cannula, I'm sort of ironing out that little edge in the graft. The way you do that is you deepen the chamber a bit by putting some more fluid inside of the eye, and that gives you the space to put some taps on the corneal surface, and that irons out that little inward edge. And now the only thing that remains to be done here is to lift the graft up to the back surface of the cornea, top an air bubble. You'll notice that basically all of the manipulations, when it comes to graft unfolding, the vast majority of them took place through the main wound. And I really feel very strongly about that. I mention that on my videos all the time, that I use the main wound. And the reason is it's just so much more ergonomic to use the main wound as opposed to trying to fiddle and sneak in through the various paracenteses. Using the main wound is so much more convenient. You have so much more control over what you are doing. You're not going to lose the graft via expulsion from the eye so long as the pressure inside the eye is not high. If you keep a nice low pressure, you can come in and out of the main wound with no problem. So now we've got the graft lifted up to the posterior surface of the cornea. It's atop this big air bubble. And you'll notice there's no trouble pressurizing the eye. Even though this patient has a functioning trab, you're not losing any bubbles up into the trab. It's basically like a normal case. And we're supplementing here the anesthesia at the end by injecting a little bit of sub-Tenon's Exparel. That's something we often do for these patients to make sure that they're comfortable that night. We just give them a little extra medicine. So this eye looked a little bit daunting because it was the only eye of a patient who had lost the other eye from, glaucoma, which also afflicts this eye. This eye has had glaucoma surgery, has big iris defects, has a failed previous DSEK, and you think, well, are you going to go back and do a DMEK in this eye? But you find the operation is basically exactly like a normal DMEK. There are very few modifications at all, which is important to keep in mind how this eye differs from an eye that has a tube shunt. The tube shunt eyes do tend to have IOL instability with aqueous and air bubble misdirection, which further contributes to a shallow anterior chamber, which you also see with the peripheral anterior synechia that often appertain. With a trab, it's normally a regular deep anterior chamber. The iris defects don't make any difference at all so long as you just inject the graft away from them. It doesn't seem to impact the case whatsoever. Normally I make these videos to show the surgical technique, and actually the way that I started making these videos, I always record all of my cases and I always watch all of them back to see what I could have done better. It was one of my sisters that suggested actually that if I'm making these videos anyway and I'm reviewing them and taking notes and trying to improve my technique, I might as well just post them online because all the analysis has already been done and it may be helpful to other people. So that's why these videos look like they do. They look like they do and they sound like they do because I'm analyzing them, I think, for whoever is watching the same way that I analyze them for myself. Some of the comments that we get to these videos are, will you please show the post-operative pictures of the eye, the post-operative appearance? I've always kind of thought that that was a little bit beside the point because I make the video not to show how good the eye looks, but to show how to do the surgical technique so people can learn in these complicated cases what to do, how to technically accomplish the surgery. However, we actually do have a post-operative video of this patient because he was such a special individual. He came from far away and just had the one eye. And we did the surgery in our office on a Thursday. We saw him the next day on a Friday and then again on Monday. And then we just sent him home. So he lives 5 hours away, something like this. And this is how he looked on Monday. So I guess 4 or 5 days after the operation. This is a video taken through the slit lamp shot with our iPhone. So this shows the clarity of the cornea. You can see how shockingly clear the cornea is here just 4 or 5 days later. He was 2200, so the cutoff for legal blindness at the time of the operation. And here, 4 days later, he's 2050, so from legally blind to legally driving, just, I guess, 4 days after the operation. The eye's comfortable. He's not light sensitive. He's sort of sitting through while we make these pictures and videos and show the appearance of the eye. So it's kind of a nice little thing to add in here, and we actually also have a testimonial from the patient that we'll include here about what his experience was like, which I think is also useful in this case because, when you only have one eye and that one eye is having surgery, everybody's nervous about that operation, of course, so everybody wants it to go well. The patient is apprehensive because you think, oh gosh, it's my only eye. I'm having a corneal transplant. The last one that I had didn't work so well. I hope this one works good. But I hope this video gives you a little bit of confidence, perhaps, to do these surgeries in cases that seem a little bit scarier than they actually are. That's sort of the secret for these complicated DMEKs. We make these videos of eyes that look so terrible, but the vast majority of them actually are paper tigers. The vast majority of these cases are really simple and straightforward and behave like normal cases as long as you keep the normal strategies in mind. I hope you also enjoyed these post-operative pictures. If they make you feel more comfortable when you're taking up these surgeries for yourself, that's great. Or if you're a patient watching and you're worried about what will the eye look like after a couple of days, you might expect it to look something like that, even if you've had a really, really difficult time with the eye in the past.
It was all worth it. I could tell on Saturday morning when I woke up, everything, I started seeing the TV and everything. I thought I was dreaming. I said, Lord, I could see. I could see. And Sunday morning, it got better. And I tell you what, Monday, it got even better. I drove from my girlfriend's house to my house, about 6 miles. She said, "You can drive." I said, "Yeah." And then even yesterday when the rain and stuff came, I went to Elba, came back, and I drove. I said, "Lord have mercy, God is good." He's good, man.